Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cancer Research Africa. I am so excited about the scientific guest that we have today. But before we get to that, just a quick opening that I am Professor Folakemi Odedina, and I happen to have the honor of serving as guest chief scientific correspondent for Cancer Research Africa with the special segment that focuses on establishing successful research scholarship. Okay, you all often hear publish or perish, right? This is how important it is today. We are going to be talking to one of the best colleagues that I have who knows what it is to publish or perish. So hopefully it is going to focus on publishing and there will be no perishing for anybody. But please join me in welcoming Professor Olorunseun Ogunwobi. Welcome.
Thank you so very much. It's my pleasure to be here.
Okay, awesome. So first of all, let's just kind of start from the background, because a lot of people are looking at this series and they're wondering what is the background of the people who are here, who are given the series, and what really has helped them to be where they are, to be acclaimed, getting all these grants and publishing. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself? And don't leave out the part, because I really want African cancer scientists to connect with you, because you are also an African immigrant as well. So some people may be able to learn from your journey. So can you just tell us a little bit about your journey?
Yeah, so I started off at the University of Ibadan. I went to medical school there and completed my MBBS degree, and got the opportunity early on in my career to be able to go to the United Kingdom for a master's degree in biomedical science. I completed that at the University of Hull. And then while I was there, I applied to PhD programs and was very fortunate, even back then when it was a challenge to secure studentships in the United Kingdom. I was fortunate to be able to secure a studentship to study cancer biology, molecular biology at the University of East Anglia in Norwich. And then when I completed that training, I did a brief postdoctoral stint under my advisor, Dr. Ian Beals, there at the University of East Anglia in Norwich. And then after I completed that, I moved to the United States back in 2008 and did a little more postdoctoral training first at the Virginia Commonwealth University, and then finally, I was able to complete my postdoctoral training at the University of Florida in Gainesville, where I had the good pleasure of meeting Dr. Odedina. And God has been so kind to me on my research efforts. Shortly thereafter, I was able to start my own lab as an independent investigator. And I've had a lot of success, not only with my research, but on the very topic we'll be discussing today on actually getting published. And I'm looking forward to the opportunity of sharing some of my experience in that aspect with you.
Thank you for sharing that. So let's just kind of think and wind back a little bit. How did you develop the passion in cancer biology? Was it something that you were thinking about when you were in medical school, or was it something that maybe perchance was something that touched your mind after you left Nigeria?
You know, I have to be perfectly honest with you. Schooling in Nigeria, receiving medical training in Nigeria, cancer biology was never really something that I dreamed.
That is exactly why I was asking that question, right?
And I have to be honest, it wasn't, you know, I was thinking of perhaps receiving further training in surgery, maybe obstetrics and gynecology. At one point, I thought I would be an ophthalmologist. But when I got the opportunity to go for my master's degree in biomedical science, that's when my interest in the basic sciences was piqued. Wow. Then it really got cemented or solidified when I finally got accepted to do a PhD training in cancer biology. I liked it. I liked it from the beginning. I liked it so much that I would go to the lab early in the morning and I would not come back until night. And then it occurred to me, this is really what I wanted to do.
Yeah. Isn't that enlightening? Because a lot of times, and I think this speaks to people who are in the pipeline now, a lot of times they have a tunnel vision of, I'm just going to be in the medical field. And people are not thinking about research, right? That this could be something that is fulfilling to you, for you. And in this area of evidence-based medicine, there are things that needs to be done to be able to have, real care and real personalized medicine. So what would you say, in general about, really giving yourself a broad view of what may be something else that you could consider, and it's not just medicine?
Yeah, I think I definitely echo those sentiments. All of our colleagues, whether they be in the diaspora or even be back home, keep an open mind, especially when you're more junior in your career and your training. Keep an open mind. Pay attention to everything that's taught. And again, thinking back to my situation, I wish I paid a lot more attention to the basic sciences when we were taught it, but I paid enough attention that when it was time, I was able to leverage what I was taught. So pay attention to keep an open mind. Don't be so fixated on a particular specialty or subspecialty. As time goes on, you may see opportunities that you never saw that you can capitalize on. And of course, it's not just in the clinical sciences that we can make impact. As Dr. Odedina, as you mentioned, with the advancement, with the progress that's going on, we African scientists, African clinicians, we also need to think about making impact in the basic sciences, the research, being at the forefront of pushing implementation of new ideas, innovative technologies and things like that. And we have our colleagues all around the world that are really doing this. And so keep an open mind and don't restrict yourself to just thinking that you have to be a clinician or you have to be in a certain mode of just the people you've seen around you. There's more that can be done.
Yeah, great. One more question before we go to the publish or perish. You started being a cancer biologist, but you are really a translational scientist. Can you explain what it means to be a translational scientist, especially within your field?
Okay, so the way that I think about it is my work, my research is guided by an endpoint. So I have colleagues in the same department who don't have that view of being translational because maybe their endpoint is understanding a gene and how it functions. But in my case, my endpoint is how can what we're studying, even at the most basic level, how can it potentially impact people, patients in hospitals, communities, health systems. So that's the key. And if you have that endpoint, a translational endpoint as your endpoint of impacting something bigger than what you're doing, then you'll be open to an approach that enables that. And often that means you can't do it alone. Because as a cancer biologist, if my endpoint is translational, I understand that at some point I'll need clinicians, maybe to provide tissues or to test an idea out on their patients. Maybe I'll need behavioral scientists. Maybe I'll need people that have expertise with the community. That worldview starts to impact the approach you take, your willingness to be collaborative, to learn a little bit about what other people are doing, to open up yourself, to teach them a little bit about what you're doing, to get criticism from them that may not make sense to you, but maybe that's what's gonna change the paradigm and help us solve the big problem that all of us have not been able to solve individually. So that's what being translational means to me. And sometimes it's a struggle with some of our colleagues that are a little more siloed to be able to convince them that this matters. I know it was a struggle I had to overcome to get tenure and promotion and things like that. But if you're dogged and show them that you strongly believe this, and then part of the way you prove it to them is what we'll talk about. You start publishing.
Yes.
You start getting grants. They say, oh, okay, wow. So you collaborate, you can do all these things. They're translational, and you can be successful, and then they start to believe you. I will share my screen to enable you to see my presentation. I am a professor in the Department of Biological Sciences at Hunter College of the City University of New York. and I'm also the director of the Hunter College Center for Cancer Health Disparities Research, as well as an adjunct faculty member in the Department of Medicine at Weill Cornell Medicine. Today, I'll be talking about publishing in peer-reviewed journals, and I'd like to start by explaining why I'm quite comfortable talking about this topic. I've had over 68 published peer-reviewed journal articles, many of which are highly cited. In addition to that, I have editorial experience at the level of associate editor for a number of reputable journals, including Frontiers in Genetics, Frontiers in Oncology, Biomarker Insights, PLOS ONE, among others. And of course, I have many years of experience as a peer reviewer myself for many high-impact scientific journals around the world. So I'm quite comfortable talking about this. And I like to present this in form of the key milestones that I think all of us need to be aware of to be able to successfully publish in peer-reviewed scientific journals. There's 6 of them that I'll be talking about in this presentation. The first is what we need to know before writing, while writing, after writing, before submitting, while submitting, and after submitting. So let's get right into it. What do we need to know before we write? Now, will really help us to be very successful in publishing in peer-reviewed scientific journals. A critical aspect to consider before writing is the research that we're hopefully going to be publishing about at the end of conducting the research. It's important that our research addresses an important research question. If we get that right, we stand a good chance of being able to publish good articles later on. It's also important that in the conduct of the research that we use innovative, reliable methods. That tends to play very well in the long run. And then it's important that we perform detailed and thorough analysis of data that we accumulate from our research using acceptable methods. And then it's important that we ensure that we ourselves clearly understand and can simply explain the main conclusions of our research. If we understand it in the most simple way, then we can convey what we understand in the most explainable, most understandable way to others. And that will make for a good article that can do well in peer review and end up being published. And then finally, before writing, it's very helpful that we come up with a short list of reputable peer-reviewed journals that are read by the target audience for the research that we've conducted. And I generally create such a short list and put in order of preference, and so that my initial writing is tailored towards my journal, my peer-reviewed journal of highest preference, and then we can go on from there as needed. So that's before writing. Those are the considerations that I encourage you to keep in mind before ever you contemplate writing. But now, while writing, there are some important considerations as well. It's important to thoroughly understand the instructions for developing a manuscript by your preferred journal. Remember, I encourage you to create a short list where your top preference, really fully understand the instructions for developing a manuscript for that journal. If you have to move down the list of journals, you do the same for each journal that you are writing for. And then choose a compelling title that succinctly describes your most compelling conclusion. And then carefully follow your preferred journal's instructions in writing an abstract / summary that succinctly captures key background information for your research, the key methods used, your most important findings, and an accurate and realistic conclusion based on direct, definitive data that is presented in your current manuscript. If you get your title right, if you get the abstract or summary, depending on what the journal of interest calls it right, you're well on your way. And then start writing early. If you want to get published soon, don't leave your writing until later. Start writing early. You can even start writing as soon as you have important findings that you think will lead to an article. And start writing from the section of the manuscript that you have the greatest mastery over. For many people, that is the methodology. They're familiar with it, they've used it before, or they've been using it for quite a while during the course of the research. They may want to start writing from there. The important thing is to start writing early and to start from where is easiest for you so that you get into writing from the easiest point. And then when you get into it, you can speed up as you go on. And then for your very first draft, just write as ideas come to you. The goal is to complete the draft in a reasonable amount of time, and then you can worry about improving the quality of the draft before final submission. And how do you do that? You read, you reread, you rewrite your first draft as often as needed to improve the draft. And if you continue in that iterative way, eventually you come up with a draft that's really good. And one way to do that is to frequently get feedback from multiple trusted mentors and to do so early. And then to take seriously the feedback and to use it to improve the manuscript until your draft is good enough for submission. So now after writing, what do you do? Well, the writing of your manuscript may be considered complete after you have developed the manuscript to the best of your ability using all the feedback you've received from trusted colleagues and mentors. Okay, so at that point, you can consider your manuscript ready. And once your manuscript is considered ready, well, write a compelling cover letter that highlights the importance of your manuscript and why it would appeal to readers of the journal you're submitting to. Most journals require that a cover letter is submitted. Even if one is not required, it's not a bad idea to just write one, because in a sense, it helps you to synthesize what you think is most important about your research. And if you know that, that's always useful anyways. But certainly if your journal requires a cover letter, be sure to pay attention to writing the cover letter in such a way as to make it very clear to the editor or editor-in-chief why they need to accept your manuscript, why people need to read your manuscript. And then you need to ensure that all files that the journal requires, the figures, the supplementary files, whatever the specific files they're requiring, make sure you have them and that you've prepared them to the specification of that particular journal. And then ensure you're registered as an author to submit manuscripts if you're going to be the one to submit, if you have the seniority to be able to do that. But if you're not, ensure that the senior author who will serve as the corresponding author or the submitting author is registered as an author to submit manuscripts to the journal of interest. And before you submit, well, check and recheck that all required files have been prepared in compliance with journal instructions. And then give yourself sufficient time to submit, as very often multiple steps may be involved. And depending on the journal, it may take anything from 30 minutes to an hour to 2 hours to half a day. It just depends. Give yourself sufficient time. Make sure that the very day in which you plan to submit, that it's a particularly good day to do that. Or otherwise, make sure you're saving at each step that you complete so that you don't have to go to start again from the beginning when next year you get back to the submission process. It is a process. And while you're submitting, start from the very first submission step, follow the process step by step, and I might add, save at each step. Do not skip any step. If the journal gives you the opportunity to suggest reviewers, take advantage of that. Suggest reviewers that are knowledgeable about your type of research if the journal gives you an opportunity to do this. And make sure you preview your final compiled manuscript before you finally submit to the journal. And submit only after fully previewing the final compiled manuscript to ensure that it looks like what you would like peer reviewers to see. If there is a significant issue with one of your files, it's not looking quite like you would like it to look, maybe a figure or something like that, it may be a good idea to edit the submission and make sure you upload the correct file in the correct way so that it looks like you would like peer reviewers to see it. What about after submitting? Well, patiently wait. Patience is a virtue in everything, including in getting published in peer-reviewed scientific journals. Periodically check the status of your manuscript. For most journals, you can do this online by logging in. Respond promptly to any communication from the journal if they have an issue with one of your files or an additional file that needs to be submitted or something like that. Respond promptly to the communication. If revisions are required, respond fully and promptly to that. If you do that, you stand a really good chance that the final outcome will be good. And if the final outcome is good, in terms of your article being accepted for publication, rejoice. And then be sure to publicize your new publication using appropriate platforms so that people know what you've done and what you're doing. And then don't hesitate to start planning for your next manuscript. And with that, I acknowledge support for my research over the years that's enabled me to garner the experience to be able to share with you steps to successfully publishing in peer-reviewed journals. And I also acknowledge the support of my lab members, present and past, who've contributed to my success in publishing in peer-reviewed journals over the years. Thank you all very much.
Thank you for sharing that. That is so very powerful. In the topic of publication, that area is something that we all know is important. But can you outline for us, why is it critical for people who want to establish a successful academic career to publish?
It is so critical. You know, the fact is, like it or hate it, we are still bean counters, all of us. You know, institutions, they count, right? How many publications? Departments counts, your chair counts. You know, so you have to do it for that very reason. Secondly, you know, how can you really advance a research area if you're not able to communicate what you're doing? I often tell my students, you know, we can cure cancer, right? We can, you know, one of the areas we're interested in is in targeting certain molecular pathways and hopefully developing new therapeutic strategies. And I've said to them, we can uncover the most efficacious therapeutic strategy in this lab, but if nobody else outside of this lab knows of it, it's totally useless.
Yes.
And so on a fundamental level, publication is probably one of the best ways to make impact. Other people learn what you're doing. If that thing seems reasonable and interesting, now people are thinking of how can we impact what Dr. Ogunwobi published, you know? And so apart from advancing in your career, it's a really impactful way of advancing your work towards impact. And for those of us who do translational work, publishing is really important, because that's when people can see your work and say, okay, maybe we can develop a clinical trial based on this. You know, maybe we can change policy based on this. They have to be able to see it in a forum that is credible. And peer-reviewed journals are that forum for many people.
Great. So I'm going to actually start a little bit back. How do you make the decision that, okay, this work is ready for me to publish? At what level should I make that decision? number one, that, okay, I'm at the point that I believe it could be, because sometimes you might even have completed the study, but maybe it's negative results and it's not what you wanted. Or you could have been conducting the study and you don't have the sample size that you should to have. And so there's this issue that maybe it is not statistically powered to be able to do it. But at some point, there needs to be, okay, when can I just say, okay, let me give this a shot?
It's a good question, and it's not an easy one, to be honest with you, but I'll give my best answer the way that I've approached it. Philosophically, I've embraced the philosophy that if we do work, which you described a few examples, maybe the project is completed, maybe somehow you couldn't get to the part that you designed, whatever it might be, the fact is we've invested time, we've invested money, we've invested people's commitments here and there. And some of all of this, if it's money maybe coming from government agencies, if it's people's time is valuable, their careers are valuable. And so philosophically, I've embraced the philosophy that we should not want all of that to go to waste. And the shortest way for it to go to waste is if we just lock up the data on our computers or in our drawers or whatever. But even if it's just the methodology that we followed, or even if it's just the fact that, hey, guys, we did this. And this is what we found. It's not what we thought, and it's not maybe what anybody thinks, but this is what we found. I feel that there's great value in communicating that, than just locking it up in your drawer, leaving it on your computer, which in my mind benefits nobody. And so that's the philosophy I've embraced. And honestly, I would like everything that I do or that I do with my colleagues to end up published. Now, does everything get published? No. Somewhere along the line in my career, there have been a few things that, regrettably, we dropped the ball because we got too busy and moved on to something else. But philosophically, I think when you've invested time and other resources, people's efforts, funds, I see value in trying to communicate that work in a peer-reviewed forum. Obviously, the impact, where you will get it published depends, but I think there is still some value in at least getting it published. It may not be the highest impact journal, but putting it in the public domain.
Great. I love your response when you talked about the idea that it may not even be the whole thing. The methodology might be something that is so novel that you really want to publish the methodology, or maybe you develop an instrument and you want to publish that instrument. And I think it's very critical to be able to do that, because people can learn from that methodology and people can learn from, from there. You also mentioned something that, sometimes we get so busy, and I'm guilty of it, that you might be running 6, 7 projects at the same time. And before you know it, the years are creeping up and there's some that you've done, and, how do I get it published? What are ways? Because I think it's very difficult if you are leading your research program, to be the one that is able to do all the publications. How have you been able to handle the fact, and I know that your lab is very busy as well. Is there any suggestions that you might have? Especially, I think when you're coming up and you're an early stage investigator, you have all the time in the world, you have all the hungry, but as you creep up and you have administrative role and you creep up and you have multiple things, how is the best way to make sure that the work that is within your lab actually gets out?
I can sense that you feel my pain. You probably have the pain longer, far before I started feeling it. But eventually, I'm hoping all of those in our audience will get to that point, if they're not already there, in which they're swamped with administrative duties, teaching duties, other kinds of leadership duties. But we still need to publish, right? So what I've done that I found successful is PhD students, I insist they have to do a first draft. I really do, and I do so from the get-go, okay? My lab, I say to them, I'm not gonna sign off on a PhD here if your work doesn't pass through external peer review. because it's one thing for me to think is good quality, but it's important for the research field that other people outside of my lab also independently vet your work. And the best way to do it, write up a paper, let's submit it, let it go through peer review. If it gets published, it gives us another level of confidence that you've done the best quality work, and then we can sign off on your PhD. That's my philosophy. People coming into my lab know that. My institution, I've gained a reputation for that typically that's an expectation.
That is awesome.
And so that helps a lot. Virtually everybody has published one or more. They do the first drafts, obviously. I have to give a lot of feedback for some more than others. And sometimes the level of feedback will dictate the level of impact it can be published.
Absolutely.
Depending on how quickly they work out, how promptly they're getting back with the feedback and their timelines and so forth. Postdocs, definitely. If graduate students have to do first draft, postdocs do, and postdocs, I expect more from them in terms of better quality first drafts and more rigorous sort of revision of what comes back. And quite frankly, I expect that I don't have to do too much work on my end before it's to a reasonable standard for submission to peer review. So to be honest, as I've gained seniority, I've leaned more and more on this approach. I have to be very honest with that. And you're right, when I was more junior, I took on much more of the writing from start to finish. But as I've gained seniority, I've leaned more. And I think it's beneficial, not just for the lab, but actually for the trainees, because I found that I learned to be better at writing when I was allowed to take on more responsibility for writing my own work. And so my philosophy is that if my trainees, the best way of training them in writing and in the publishing process is of involving them, not just in doing the first drafts. I've increasingly now started to involve trainees in writing the cover letter, depending on their level of experience. Sometimes certain trainees, I've also sort of taken them through certain steps of the submission process. When the revisions come back, certain trainees, I've allowed them to do first drafts of the model. So it helps me out, but I think it's a good way of training them as well.
That is absolutely great, great comment. Because quite a number of people, they might not even have graduate students or postdoc, but they can reach out to junior investigators because and then see whether they want to be involved and create this writing team that helps them to be able to have this done. This brings me to what you were saying is like, as you pull in people, I think one of the things that sometimes people struggle with, and it's not only in Africa, I think is global, is authorship. How do you determine authorship?
Yeah, it's one of the trickiest questions in the field, right? Well, in the biomedical field, a lot of journals have actually predefined for you who is eligible for authorship and actually insist that you stipulate, quite explicitly what each person did. And so in some respects, you can actually, for some journals, you can, the lead author, the corresponding author, the most senior author can decide who all the authors are, but then you have to say what they all did. So that's transparent, right? You can put them on there and say, oh, they read, they read the final version of the manuscript. That's transparent enough. And then people can ascribe credit to them as they see fit. Others will say only authors who have done X, Y, and Z should be included. All others should be acknowledged. So if you want to publish in such a journal, you just follow that direction and try to be as honest as possible and only list authors who have met that particular those criteria, and then the others in acknowledgement. So that's how I've generally done it. And as just a personal approach, I have determined personally to be more liberal-minded. Of course, while being within the confines of what have either been defined by the journal or of course, there are general ethical guidelines for all of us in the field as well. I'm mindful of those, but in interpreting the general guidelines as well as specific journal guidelines, I've approached it with sort of a collaborative approach. So rather than minimize the contribution of my colleagues, because we can do that, we can use a discussion and say, oh, they just read the draft. If I can find it within my thinking to say they've contributed intellectually, I'm willing to credit them with authorship as allowed by the general guidelines.
That is awesome. So thank you for the outstanding presentations that you have presented. If you were going to go ahead and just say 2 to 3 things, this is what you need to do before, this is what you need to do during, and this is what you need to do after, what would you advise people to think about critically as they think about how they're going to publish their work?
I think the before is very important, and I will say it starts with your research question. If you have a choice, always go for the most compelling research question. What's the biggest need in your field that you know of? I will start there, and then I would follow that up with, in trying to answer that most compelling research question, use the most innovative methodology. If you have those 2 ingredients, it's a great start. Then as soon as you do your research, which is the drawing, I would start thinking of publishing earlier than many people do. In other words, as soon as I start getting resolved, or as soon as I've really properly nailed down my methodology, I'll start thinking of, for example, maybe even starting to write up the methods a little bit, starting to put together the data that are coming in the most presentable way. Do your analysis on time, make sure they are well powered, and as you're doing your analysis, start putting together the data in the way that is most presentable. And then as far as during the submission process itself, I think choice of journal matters. In my presentation, I didn't talk too much about this, but don't be fixated on just the most highest impact journal. I would like to add this at this point. Because, for example, in my field, certain journals, everyone's aware of them, Science, Nature, Cell, and so forth, and they're good. But, Dr. Odedina, as you know, probably better than I, there is an issue in the field in which people get published in some of those journals, not just on the basis of the merit and quality of their work, but the other issues that you and I and many others are trying to address. And so you may find that you have good quality work, but they're delaying acceptance and publication in Science, Cell, or Nature. But you don't want to slow down your career by becoming fixated on publishing in one of those. It may be good to consider publishing somewhere else that can get your work communicated out sooner. And so I would say consider all of those. And if you do, you'll find yourself publishing more often and not perishing as a result.
Very, very well said. That is very well said. I only have a couple of more questions left because I can see that we are counting down to end of the segment. So number one, I think you mentioned something about the publications. This is really a golden nugget. So thank you so much, Dr. Ogunwobi. This has really been outstanding. So let's talk about the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is, bias, discrimination, in publication, especially when we're thinking about our African colleagues. What are and which has pushed them towards these predatory journals? Because it's so difficult because of the bias, because of it's so difficult for them to be able to get their work published. Meanwhile, there are people, we are going to leave that for another time, but wanted to mention, there are people that are coming from outside Africa, going to Africa, taking their knowledge and publishing it in this high-tier journal. But if they are the one that have that the same publication and submitted it to the high-tier journal, they would not be able to publish it. So I want to end with that. How can they handle this particular issue? Because it's really impacting the African scientists.
The way to address this is, in my view, is multi-pronged, right? So we definitely need to be talking to our colleagues at this, highest profile journals to rethink their process for, peer review, deciding what to accept or reject, and for them to understand that everyone sees that there is obvious bias in their process, and it's not good for our field for this viewpoint to prevail as it is. So that's one level. But the other level is on the part of our colleagues that are based in Africa. I would say, no matter what, we know what the problems are. Don't publish in a predatory journal. Now, it's easier said than done. I think some of them are sort of almost on the fence. Is this predatory or not? But my understanding is some are very clearly predatory, so definitely stay away from them. In terms of the ones that are not, one good rule of thumb that I've found is if the publishing company, they're well-reputed publishing companies, they have a lot of journals. It may be a newer journal, it may be a lower impact journal, it may not be well known, but it is published by a highly reputable publishing company. That's good. And here's one other thought, and I think this has helped me in my thinking, and I hope it will help all of my colleagues, in Africa and elsewhere. Good work speaks for itself. It may not be published in Science or Cell or Nature or New England Journal of Medicine or JAMA or Lancet or wherever. But if what you've published is going to make a change, a significant change, whether in clinical practice or some other way, eventually that will happen. And eventually you will receive due credit no matter where it's published. I'm reminded of, and this is what I learned, and maybe folks may know better about this, but apparently the discovery that Helicobacter pylori is the cause of gastric ulcer, and that needed to be addressed, was not published in the highest impact journals. But eventually good science won. They got a Nobel Prize for that discovery. So again, don't publish in predatory journals. Do your level best to make sure that the journal is reputable, and reputation is not just impact factor, or so long as it's a legitimate publishing company and a legitimate journal. It may be relatively new, it may not be highest impact for that field. If that's where at the moment your work will be accepted, okay, it's good work. If it's going to make an impact, it will in time. But on the other hand, what I did say before, all of us, particularly those of us who have a little more ability to influence things on the side of the journals here, I mean, we shouldn't give up in letting them know that that it's now well known of the bias in the process, and this can't continue, because it can be good for science, it can be good for research. All of us will benefit more if that's addressed. Let good science and research be published, and the process should not really be, it's not helpful to any of us if it's impacted by non-scientific factors.
There is no other way to end but with what you just said. Thank you so much. That is really some really key knowledge. Good work will always make an impact, and try as much as possible to publish and get your work there. And I also like what you also said. It is now left for some of us, including yourself, who are very well known in this area, to keep talking to the publishers and to keep putting their feet into the fire and let them know that there should be no bias in science. And everyone, including our colleagues in Africa, should really get their opportunity to be able to publish their science, in great journals as well. Dr. Ogunwobi, it is such a pleasure to welcome you to Cancer Research Africa. Thank you so much. This has been so outstanding. Thank you for joining us again. I did tell you that you are really going to get the best of the best in this special segment of establishing a successful academic career. And so again, if you want the PowerPoint that was shared by Dr. Ogunwobi, please go ahead, subscribe to Cancer Research Africa, and you will get a copy of this PowerPoint slide deck. Thank you so much again, Dr. Ogunwobi. Outstanding and outstanding. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.